Welcome back from the break. We're about to kick off the next set of presentations. And I'm not sure how to phrase it, but I guess I have the pleasure of introducing myself. I'll be talking about the issues in conceptualizing, measuring, and reporting diversity. A lot of organizations like ours, 5-6 years ago, started to look into how we handle diversity, whether our grantees are diversified, whether the people we contract with to do research are diversified, whether we're diversified. And we wanted to do something to foster diversification. Managers, our investment managers. And so we first had to conceptualize, how did we think of diversity? So we decided on gender, ethnicity, and in gender, women, male, female, ethnicity, black, people of color. People of color includes, I separate it because too many times in certain fields you have overrepresentation of people of color, where the people of color might be Asian and not black or Latinx. So we decided Latinx, black would be separated from other people of color, which is a more inclusive group. And then, what do we want to apply this to? Well, first our board, then our staff, our investment managers, and our vendors, and our grantees. And what levels within those? Well, we would start out with ownership, and the best example for this crowd might be investment managers. So ownership, leadership, and then something we called pipeline, tomorrow's leadership. Eventually, we dropped the pipeline and replaced it with all staff because it was too hard to identify for people how to fill it in. And that's where we started with this. And I've written papers that got published about this because I felt every time we made a decision or I participated and said, this is how we should do it, 2 days later I decided it was wrong. We can't do it that way. We have to rethink it. How about this? So eventually I compiled all the problems we had, not necessarily solutions, but I knew where the issues were. And I thought others could benefit from our pain as much as we benefited from others in doing this. And the underlying thought was, for people that are doing this for the right reasons, that want to make a meaningful change, they need to be able to track and report how they're doing. And if they're 100% honest in their reporting, in their measurement, in their data collection, they shouldn't be penalized for totally misleading the public with what they say. So for instance, let's say an organization has a 5-person board. 20% is female, 20% are of color, 20% have a disability, and 20% are LGBTQ+. In your mind, picture what this 5-person board looks like. Yeah, 5 white men and 1 woman of color who's gay and disabled. Was there anything wrong with what they said? No, it was 100% accurate. But if you don't think about it, are you misleading? Someone looks at those quotes and they get a picture. Now the question in the participation phase is, what do you do about it? You have these percentages, you have the 5-person board, and you want to accurately reflect it without being misleading. So what are the solutions? Any ideas? Tough one. I said, have a metric over how many people those percentages are spread over. In this case, it would be spread over 1 person. Now, if you wanted to accommodate 100%, you would have said 20% are white males. And then you could say, if it was true that there were 5 individuals, each with one of those traits, that it was spread over 5 people. You can't put a picture in, because a lot of this you can't tell by looking at a picture. So in some way, you have to quantify for a user, much like we talk about standard deviation of returns. This might be a spread metric over those 80%, 20, 20, 20, and 20, are all contained in one person. If you did that, it wouldn't be misleading. Everybody would understand. How about this? A press release from an organization reports they've increased senior female leadership fourfold. That's 4x, 400%. So of the 1,000 senior leaders, 1 female now became 5. Perfectly accurate reporting. It is an increase of 400%. And we've had not exactly something like this. I'm making it a little bit of extreme for the purpose of presentation. But we were looking at some of the analysis and saying, yeah, we've seen meaningful percentage increase, which only meant that where we were was, it wasn't as horrifically bad, but it was still horrifically bad. If you have 1,000 leaders, going from 1 to 5 is a big percentage increase, but is it meaningful? I'd say, no, you're on the right path. It's better than losing the 1, but this isn't something you brag about by saying we've increased it fourfold. You basically say we've increased the number of female leaders, but we still have a long way to go, and you forget about talking about what the percentage increase was. An organization has 10 owners. 6 of them are female. Do you count them as a majority-owned institution, whether it be a fund manager or a vendor? 10 owners, 6 females. Well, that sounds like a majority, but not if the ownership is 1% for each of the females. So it depends on what the unit of account is. Are you counting ownership percentage, or are you counting the number of people? That becomes a big issue. The unit of account is very thorny, especially when you're aggregating your results as an organization. When we look at investment managers and we aggregate, it's very hard to figure out how we should go about it, and there's no perfect answer. Do we aggregate all the interest among all the managers, then divide? Do we add the number of managers that have a majority in a certain way? So how do you accumulate the different units? It's really off topic for this because it's a lot more detailed, but it's an issue, and we could see it here. Even in one institution, are we counting people or are we counting ownership interest? I mentioned that we were interested in Black, Latinx, and female. So this is ethnicity. We have one manager is 25% Black, 25% Latinx, and 50% white. Where do we put them? Sorry? Well, this is how they identified them. For the purposes of our account, most of the people, most of the organizations we say this is the information we would like, they allow their employees, their owners, to self-identify. So we find out that, and this is just one person, but it shows the problem. They're a quarter Black, a quarter Latinx, and half white. So for the purposes of our classification, where we want to count the number of Black, the number of Latinx, and everything else, where do we put them? Could we put them and say they count towards Black? Well, that's a quarter. Do they count more towards Black or to Latinx, since it's the same? And both of those are what we're trying to capture, and that together they're the same, percentage is white. So how do you figure this out? Do we not count them? Do we start using percentages? So we say this person is 25%, 25%. Nothing's perfect. What we decided to do was we just needed a policy of how we count it. If we're going to count it as Black, if you're at 25%, that's what we do for everybody. As long as, or the policy might be, whatever the biggest percentage is where they go. So in this case, the biggest percentage is white. So we would count them as not meeting any, we wouldn't put them in any of the buckets that we're trying to capture. Is that exactly right? No, it's not exactly right, but it's closer to right than being a lot wrong. And if we're trying to really figure out where we are and honestly see where we need improvement, that might be the best way to do that in this case. Of course, that leads us to this one. 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Now, there is no greatest. They're all the same. So what do you do in this case? Could we say visible minority? Have a category that says, okay, if you're a combination of one of these things we're trying to capture, you go into that. Kind of difficult, because then if we're really trying to see how we do with Black and Latinx, we won't know. We would almost have to say, we're only going to capture these combinations and not independent. So that could work, but it kind of changes what we wanted to do. Now, the consultant we had that was working with us said, what we'll do is you really have a choice. They're not one more than anything else. So we can count this as being meeting one of those things, either Black or Latinx, because they're not more white than anything else, and they're 2/3 what you want to capture. We just don't know which of the two boxes to put them in. So how about we put them in the box whichever you're shortest of at that moment. If you've done very good with Latinx, we'll count it as being representing Black, and if you've done well with Black, we'll count it as Latinx. It makes sense, but it doesn't feel so good, does it? Legitimately, they could go in either, so how do you pick? I mean, it would probably sound better if we said we'd flip a coin. This way, we're not window dressing. We're not trying to make it look better. We got to put them in one, so maybe we'll flip a coin. Or maybe we'll just pick one. But in picking one, and when I say pick one, not at the moment, before we get to this situation, we'd have to have a system that we said, whenever this happens, this is how we're going to handle it. This is our policy. Now, whether it's we go with wherever we're lowest, or we say we'll do it alphabetically, or we'll start out by saying Black first, then Latinx, if they're equal, we could always say what our policy is. If we decide it's going to be wherever we're lowest, we say our policy, when there are ties, will be to handle it this way. And that's probably the best thing you can do, whatever your policy is. And there will be situations like this where you're going to torture yourself, or we were tortured trying to figure out how do you appropriately handle it. Vendor diversity. Organization reported that they have two law firms they use. One is not diverse, and the other is 100% owned by persons of color. So what do we say about the diversity of legal firms? 50-50, except that the non-diverse firm is handling 90% of the work. So do we care about the diversity of the firm if they're really a de minimis provider of the legal services? So it's the questions we ask. It's the information we want. You may have hired a firm, but if you're not giving them the work, then does it really count? One of the things I've heard said as a reason for diversity is because diverse leaders, a group of diverse leaders, make better decisions. That diversity helps the decision-making process. So it's a question for the audience. What does that mean? right?
That look and have different opinions, look, feel, and have different experiences,
Okay.
create different outcomes.
So I'll repeat it for the virtual audience. Different people from different backgrounds, different experiences, different outcomes, bring different perspectives together that help make the best decision for the group. Was that a fair characterization? Okay. So you would agree then that a 100% woman-owned firm has no diversity and therefore makes worse decisions?
No, because the women at the table... Sorry, no, I don't, because the women at the table can all be diverse.
But so could all white men, right?
So can white men.
Yeah.
If the white men at the table, and I agree that a table of white men can all be diverse, because they can all come from with different experiences and different backgrounds. I think that a table of white men can be diverse. Okay. I think a table of women can be diverse. I think a BIPOC table can all be diverse. If you're strategic and carefully select the people at the table that all come from different backgrounds and all have different experiences when they sit at that table.
But you see the issue with this is almost anybody could say, we have 100% diversity, but we don't look at color, ethnicity. We look at all the things they bring to the table.
No, I think the issue is that when you look at a picture of what that diversity looks for, if you go to like the web page and you look at a picture, people do not have the background of every single person in that picture, and they're only looking at what they visually see. And so you have to be able to create an illusion of diversity that is not just a round table of white men. And so for people to be able to see the illusion of diversity, they have to see an array of sex, color, whatever your diversity is at the table. It's an unfortunate situation that we're in.
Yeah. When we say see, we don't really mean physically see, right? Because a lot of this we can't see. But it's the idea of diversity. If the leadership needs to be diverse to make decisions, and we feel good about hiring a manager that's owned all by people of color, does that manager have the diversity? Well, they may have different backgrounds. We wouldn't know that. If they were all women, we wouldn't know that. But we would know. We would call them diverse, even though there's no diversity. So are we talking about intra-manager diversity or extra-manager diversity? So if I had one firm that was owned by all white people and one firm owned by all black people, I have two different firms, so maybe my diversity is firm versus firm. But the decision-making characteristic is within the firm, and neither of them has diversity the way we would think about diversity. Maybe they have background diversity, but we would never know that. So do they make better decisions? Or do the fact that these two firms are separately diverse, not within themselves, give us a diversified portfolio at the manager level? I don't know. That would be an interesting study to see if two managers in the same sector, one's diverse, one's not, or one's all black, let's say, and one's all white, are their holdings different? If their holdings are different, then you could say, as an organization invested in both, our portfolio is diversified among our holdings, assuming they each held the same amount of assets. But if they're making similar investments, then the diversity hasn't helped. If they had different characteristics within the management, then the research that says diverse leaders within a group make better decisions, you'd be able to see that. So it depends on what you mean by diversity. Now, generally, people don't like to be asked that question. When someone says diverse manage or diverse leaderships will make better decisions, and you ask them, what do you mean? Do you have to be diverse within the organization? And if they say, yes, that's what diversity is, then you'd say, well, then all female-owned is not diverse, all black-owned is not diverse, all white male-owned is not diverse. But most people would think they did a good thing by making an investment with an all-female-owned firm. They'd say, yes, that meets our diversity criteria. And in fact, it may, because I would say that underlying that rationale is we would like to see people who have previously been excluded from receiving money to invest on behalf of clients be included. Largely, let's say, black-owned investment managers. They could be 100% owned, and we would like to give them money to invest for us, and we would count them as diversified. I just wouldn't use the rationale that they make better decisions. There's no reason to believe they make better or worse decisions, but because they're not diversified doesn't mean they don't make better decisions. And that rationale about the research and why people are using it is not the reason we're doing these diversification efforts. It's to give people that have been excluded historically over time from having an opportunity to access the financial markets through some of our investments. So it's not how you count them, it's the rationale you're going to give. So when people say we should do this because they make better decisions, that's the flaw in the ointment with that. Yeah, let's wait for the microphone, though. And if anybody has more questions, put your hand up so we can get you a mic. We have plenty of time for questions.
I would even be more skeptical of their decision-making ability because people are more inclined to hire people that look and see and have the same background as they do. So if you're hiring a firm of all women leaders and managers, it's likely that the people who are hiring all are hiring the same people that are like them. Or if you're hiring a firm that all have purple men leading them, it's likely that all those men are similar and have the same background and are all the same. It's when you get people who are different that they've made an effort to hire people outside of the people that they are. It's just we're naturally inclined to hire people that are the same as we are. And because our networks are the same as we are, it's just proven that you are going to hire someone that is like you. It takes a lot of effort to go outside of your natural sort of network and your natural conviction to hire someone like you, to hire someone that is not like you. And so I'd be very hesitant to hire all women because they're all going to be the same. Or all purple men are all going to be the same purple men.
Yeah, I agree, and it takes a conscious effort. If you want managers who have been historically excluded, like women-owned firms and black-owned firms, they're going to be smaller, maybe newer, with not as much assets, and your criteria for what that checklist is of a new manager has to be, you have to relax that. You have to say there's going to be money we're going to dedicate to firms that typically wouldn't make the cut based upon how we evaluate new managers. You have to be very thoughtful about it and understand that these are new opportunities. When we do grantees that are going to do research, we've historically gone to the Ivy League research centers. That's our history. And to find a new crop of researchers that no reason they couldn't be just as good, they just weren't in our background and history, we had to say, we're going to maybe not do this grant to Harvard. Maybe we have to go to an HCBU or HBCU. And we have to understand that it's going to take a little more time to find one where we all align, but we can do it if we put the effort in. They're there, and now it's time we have to make that effort to find them if we really want to diversify along our whole supply chain.
Okay, I'm going to push back. Okay, obviously wants me to push back because it's not working. I am going to push back on the idea that diverse groups tend to think better than homogeneous groups. Because I think your argument needs to be dissected, because what you're talking about is, as an individual, bringing somebody from a diverse background, is it going to be better or worse? Probably not. Just like with public health, sometimes we do interventions that at an individual level doesn't really help you, but at a public health level, at a population level, we might be able to move the needle 1 or 2% and benefit. The same thing, when you bring a group of people with diverse backgrounds, the conversation tends to be more rich. and tends to lead to better opportunities. So I think what most of these situations that you brought in, the most important question is, why are we doing this? Right? Why are we doing diversity? Is it a core value of ours that we actually want to give those who have not had the opportunity? Or is it because we genuinely believe that having diverse voice at the table is actually good for the business? Or maybe both. So it goes back again to this question that, why are we doing it? And at an individual level, diversity may or may not help. At a group level, diversity helps and quite a bit. And there's a lot of research actually on that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I like that you push back by agreeing with me. That's the kind of pushback I actually like. So at our point, it's at the core level of what we believe. We think by doing this, we're not going to hurt returns, but we're not saying it's going to increase returns. We're doing it because we believe it's the right thing for society to do. So you're right, you have to think about why you're doing it. Any other questions? We have a little over 2 minutes left. Going once, twice. Okay, thank you.